We are live. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting, and welcome to our live chat. Our guest tonight is Steven Krasner. How you doing, Steve?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you in the world?
I am in Rhode Island,
Uh-huh.
of that little state that you have to write in the those old dittos in the Atlantic Ocean.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure having you here tonight. Steven Krasner has been a professional writer in various capacities for more than 45 years, including 37 years conducting interactive, collaborative classroom writing workshops and professional development sessions across the country as Nudging the Imagination. In addition to K-12 grade appropriate workshops, he is an award-winning children's author and has been an adjunct writing professor at Bryant University in Rhode Island. Steve was a sports writer at Providence Journal newspaper for 33 years, the last 22 of which he covered the Boston Red Sox on a daily basis before retiring in 2008. He also is executive director of the nonprofit Rhode Island Right on Sports organization, which runs summer sports writing camps for underserved middle school students. Steve, it's great to have you here.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. What is Nudging the Imagination?
Well, Nudging the Imagination actually started in our own kids' classrooms. I volunteered to go in and help students write. But the premise is that everyone has a creative muscle, and as with any muscle, it needs exercise. So that was the beginnings of it. And the teachers that our kids had in elementary school, I'd say, suppose we write a mystery story. Suppose we write a tall tale. Suppose we write a mystery dinner theater script. And they would say, sure, go ahead. So that's how Nudging the Imagination began. And then it grew from teacher to teacher to principal, professional development, and it just grew organically.
So, Steve, have you ever been a classroom teacher?
My classroom experience, I mean, I visit classrooms all the time, but as far as 180 days in a full year, no, with the exception of 3 years recently teaching a freshman writing course at Bryant University.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us how you develop your expertise in writing.
Well, first of all, my writing career came about because I couldn't hit the curveball. I mean, that's what it boils down to. I didn't want to be a sports writer. The curveball in baseball. I didn't want to be a sports writer. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I played in high school. I played at Columbia University. I was pretty good, but not good enough to go pro. But as I tell students all the time, because I could write, which included being sports editor of the school's daily newspaper, because I could write, I spent 33 years getting paid to watch games. That was my job. I get to go to World Series and Super Bowls. I didn't just get to go. I got paid to go because I could write. So it's a way to show students, just saying, I mean, everyone has a passion. Writing can help you stay connected to a passion and maybe even, as in my case, make a living at it.
So what's the key to your writing ability?
I think I read a lot. When I was a kid, my mother would take us, I have a brother and a sister, to the library once a week. And I used to pull out Matt Christopher books and have one read by the time we got home. And so I also, sports obviously was a big thing for me. I played, as I said, I played and followed sports. And so I would spread the newspaper out on the floor and read, because as we all know, reading and writing go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. You can't read anything if it hasn't been written. And if you write something, you want people to read it. So it was that reading, I think, that helped me ultimately become sports editor of my high school paper and in college. And it was because I couldn't play ball, it was a nice way to stay connected to the sport.
Now let's talk about your nonprofit, Rhode Island Right on Sports. That's a cute name. How did you come up with that name?
Yeah, well, actually, we are an affiliate of the parent organization, if you will, is Right on Sports, which began in New Jersey about 16 years ago. We have been an affiliate for 10 years. And the premise behind it is to give students, especially in middle school, students who may or may not stay in school, want to keep up with their education, give them an opportunity to write about something they care about. sports. So obviously for me, it was it was a perfect marriage for me, you know, writing and sports. So it's nice to be able to show these students that writing can be fun, for one thing. And we like to preach a simple process when you write: idea to angle to research to write, revise, and edit. And if they can slow things down, relax, whatever they write in school will follow that process. And so that's part of our purpose in running the camp.
Well, so you've done a lot of good things here, a lot of good things. And I certainly appreciate your work with underserved middle school students. And you're a sportsman too. So I appreciate your background and thanks for being with us here tonight. Well, we have a topic to discuss titled Interactive, Engaging K-12 Classroom Writing Strategies. And it looks like we have 7 various topics. Where shall we jump in?
Well, I mean, one of my, one thing would be engaging the students in the writing process, especially at the younger ages. You know, and ultimately what we want to show students is that, as another bullet point here, is writing is not formulaic, you know, and there are different ways to communicate, different ways to get your point across in writing, and different options for writing creatively, expository. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways. But that the younger students, we want to show them that there's a forum for their imaginations, because all too often as they go through school, the imagination is shut down. It's like, write about this prompt, write about that prompt, and they're not allowed to think necessarily. That goes to being formulaic. But at the younger ages, you know, just you know, and we had talked about the reading writing partnership, right?
Now, so, Steve, let me interrupt you here.
Sure.
You're touching 3 different topics here, and I want to touch this before we get too far away from it. Writing process. Now, earlier, as you and I were chatting, you seem to, and even now, just now, as you spoke, you seem to disagree with the term writing process, in that there's no strict way that one must learn or one must write. Well, and in fact, the word formulaic goes along with that.
Right. But as I said, to me, the process is idea to angle to research to write, revise, and edit. So to me, that's the process. The process isn't the first paragraph has to be something, the second paragraph has to be something else, the third paragraph has to be, you know, the hamburger bun style of writing necessarily. Okay, sometimes that's necessary for testing purposes, and I understand that, you know, in the classroom. But students should also be able to see that there are other ways. Maybe you start a story with dialogue. Maybe you start a story with an anecdote. And so there are different ways to approach. I mean, basically, I like to tell the students that you're like Johnny Appleseed. You drop little seeds of information into your story. So by the end, you have an orchard. You got apples all over the place. You got a full story. But you don't have to dump them all in at the same time, or they don't all have to be in, you know, this has to be in the first paragraph, this has to be in the second paragraph necessarily. And sometimes when we read, we can, especially at elementary school, we can read stories to them, picture books, just for the joy of reading and hearing a story. But by extension, by osmosis, in some ways, the students will hear different approaches to telling a story.
Now, Steve, let's go backward again, if I may. You mentioned, you started to mention the various purposes for writing, expository and so on. Let's combine that with the concept of process. Would the process differ depending on the purpose of the writing?
The process doesn't change in the sense that, what is your idea for writing this story, this piece? Is it, are you writing a creative story? Are you writing a poem? Are you writing a research paper about George Washington? The process doesn't change. You know, you still need to have information. You still need to have the angle, what's the purpose of this piece that we're writing. So in that sense, no, it really doesn't change. And it goes back to, you know, newspaper background. There are news stories, feature stories, columns, and editorials, right? it's all the same process in terms of gathering information, but how you disseminate it to the reader may be a little different. So you may, as I said, you may be starting it with an anecdote, for instance. Again, depending on what you're writing, the content. The content will help determine, because everything you write has its own personality. What you can do with one type of piece, you can't necessarily do with another type of piece. And that just comes with experience.
So when you use the term writing process, what I'm concluding is you mean that the process would be the same, but the content might differ.
Content might differ, and approach and style and how it's written. Could it be conversational? Does it have to be strictly factual? So that will be determined by, in school, the assignment, what the assignment is.
Okay. How about understand writing is not formulaic? If there is a process, how could that process not be formulaic?
Well, because you have the process, you're going to be gathering the information you need. You're going to be narrowing it down to a focus. Okay. But how you then disseminate it can be different. As I said, start with an anecdote, start with a dialogue, start with, a certain fact and get to a certain point. I mean, that's the not formulaic part, as opposed to something called the 5-paragraph essay, for the sake of argument, right? I mean, I can understand why that's a foundation for younger students, but in teaching at Bryant University, a freshman writing course in which we wrote reflections and informational pieces, analytical pieces, and argumentative pieces, I was surprised that students were still grabbed by the throat by the 5-paragraph essay formula. And to me, I said to the students, I said, you know what it boils down to? The first paragraph, you're telling the reader what you're going to tell the reader. Then you spend 3 monster paragraphs telling the reader what you're going to tell the reader. And then you must think the reader is so dense that you have to give another paragraph to tell them what they just read. And it's, nobody writes like that in the real world necessarily, right? So, and I found that I do tutoring also, and I've been tutoring some high school seniors on the college application essays. Now, they have to write 500, no more than 500 words, no more than 650 words. They're not trained to, I find. I mean, they're stuck on that 5-paragraph essay, but that isn't helping them. I mean,
now, Steve, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm sorry to do so. And I'm stuck on that word formulaic. Now, you spoke about working with young children, new writers, and you spoke about conducting professional development workshops with teachers. And of course, if you are an elementary school teacher, you have a broad background or broad preparation for each of the subjects that you would teach.
Sure.
And you would have taken pedagogy courses for each of those. Those teachers would have taken a writing pedagogy course. And in that writing pedagogy course, they would have learned formulaic. They would have learned formulas to get students to write. And that's where that 5-paragraph process or formula derives.
Right.
So what's your argument to those teachers?
Well, to those teachers who are, I mean, obviously they are creating the foundation for writing. So there are certain rules that I want you to follow as a first grader, as a second grader, as a third grader. But we also need to show students there are options. There is not just one way to write. There's not just one way to communicate an idea or a thought. It's not math in which there's one answer. It's not science or social studies where the content is what it is or the experiment is what it is. Writing is different to me. Okay, so therefore, while early on, maybe but I mean, there are ways to get the students creative. I mean, in first grade, second grade, third grade, they're full of imagination. We don't want to kill that imagination. So, one of the things I talk about in professional development sessions is to create narratives. Okay, so you create characters from their own imaginations. Maybe you get.
You've got some props, don't you?
I do have some props. I do.
Oh, let's see.
Okay. How's this? Can we see this?
Uh-huh.
Can we see that? So you create, we want to involve everybody, creative and collaborative writing. So you get, Gerald Horse and Candy Corn Unicorn. So you get 4 characters. Now, even in this, it's involving everyone. So Gerald Horse, that's 2 people. Give me an animal that you wouldn't find at home as a pet, and give me a first name, for this animal. And then we create a setting strictly from their own imaginations. I don't know if you can see that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, and then we write. Okay, that's listed on the board. We're chefs cooking up a story. That's our list of ingredients. Okay, everything finds its way in the story. Can't leave anything out, but you can't have anything else if it's not on the list. Now, and then I sit at a laptop. We create the story sentence by sentence. And you can weave in whatever content. Giuseppe Elephant had 12 bags of peanuts. Gladys Giraffe came along and ate 3 of them. How many does he have left? And so now we're having a little fun with words. Okay, we're taking some of the stress away from them. And showing them writing can be fun,
Now, Steve, Steve, what you just gave us was a formula.
But so tell me,
how is your formula different?
It's a loose
or
formula.
More effective than the formulas that teachers would have learned in their pedagogy courses.
It's a loose formula in the sense that the students are coming up with their ideas for the characters. They're feeling that sense of ownership as opposed to being saying, this is what you need to do in the first paragraph. This is what you need to do in the second paragraph. And then when we create the stories, there is no right or wrong. The suggestion would be, okay, who has a first sentence for our story? And someone may say, once upon a time, Gerald Horse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. Someone else may say something else. Someone else may say, "Oh my, look at the trees," And so we're going to start with dialogue, And so in that way, we're going to touch on the concepts of revision and word choice and dialogue and all of that, but it's their story, and it's fun to do, but it still aligns with everything we're trying to teach them about writing.
Well, Steve, there will be people who will argue with you and question whether your approach is evidence-based. What's your response to them?
My evidence is in the classroom, seeing the students get engaged. Okay. And I think we all know as educators that unless you engage the students in the curriculum at this point, I mean, you're not so much a teacher anymore. You're an entertainer. You have to stand on your head. I mean, whether that's good or bad, you can debate, but that's what it is in the classroom, right? So what we're doing here is just showing different ways to get our students engaged, because it doesn't matter if it's 6 traits or 4,000 traits. It doesn't matter if it's Common Core or Uncommon Core. If we don't have the students engaged, then it doesn't make any difference.
Okay. Well, we better move on. We still have a number of topics to discuss. And I'm wondering whether the props you showed us just now touch upon letting imaginations run wild.
Well,
please elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, it should, and students come to school, first, second, third grade with imaginations. I mean, and all too often, as what I've seen, in visiting all these different classrooms around the country over these last 30-something years, is that by 5th and 6th grade, they just don't have them. I mean, you want to joke around with them a little bit. You want to have a little fun with words, And one of the books I wrote, well, let me ask you a quick question. What do you call this? The white liquid you pour in your cereal?
Milk.
Why? Okay. In our house, we call it cow juice.
Oh,
because what do you get from apples? What do you get from oranges? What do you get from grapefruits? Well, you got to squeeze the cow too, right? So it should be cow juice. So the point is, relax, be thinking different ways, see things in different ways, and you may have to do certain things for testing purposes and whatever your district is and whatever the rules are, that's fine. But also let's show them options. Okay. Now I'll give you an example of how imaginations are lost in teaching at Bryant. As I told you, reflections, informational, analytical, argumentative pieces. I told them 2 things. Number 1, no more than 1,000 words, because A, I don't want to read more than 1,000 words, and B, they don't want to write 1,000 words. So as I would say to them, say it once and say it well. I don't want you to pad a page and a half just to get to a certain page length. Okay. Also, I had them choose their own topics, and they found it liberating but paralyzing because they're never allowed to think. Here's the prompt, write about this. Okay. And so they would come to me and say, what do you think? You think this topic will work? And I would say, I could tell you, but I won't, because it's not helping you. You have to do the research. I won't let you flounder. You have to do the research to figure out if it's going to work or not, because at some point you're going to be in the boardroom and the boss turns to you and says, well, what do you think? And what are you going to say? What's the prompt? No. You have to be thinking. We have to teach them how to think as well.
Allow students to choose their own topics. Well, the example you gave, or the scenario you just drew, you're going to be in the boardroom. If you're in the boardroom, people are expecting a specific topic. So how do you address that?
Well, they're expecting
preparing students.
They're expecting a specific topic, but there are all sorts of different ideas, like how are we going to sell this toothpaste? Okay. At Bryant, as a matter of fact, next week, there's going to be a course on design thinking. How might we make the experience better for people who visit the New England Patriots Hall of Fame will be one of the things. And I've been a faculty mentor there this is the 5th year. It's to come up with all sorts of different ideas around the same topic.
All right.
And that's
different ways of saying the same thing. Or there's an expression and I'm not getting it now.
Okay.
It might be different zillion ways to skin a cat, or whichever that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I mean, there isn't just one way. So, I mean, if you're in a boardroom and they're having trouble selling a certain toothpaste, well, how do we market it differently? What can we do? And so that's when you come up with all your sticky notes and you post them on the board and you go around the room and you have a gazillion ideas and then you work them through.
Okay.
So that's what I mean. That's what I mean by, it may be the same topic, but there are still different ways of looking at it.
Right. So, yeah, I understand that differently now. Someone might assign a topic to you. However, you might approach it from your own point of view, your own perspective.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you write, to a large degree, there's no right or wrong. Certainly when you write creatively, there is no right or wrong. I mean, if you want to spell a name, you want to spell David with 3 V's. Okay, fine. It's your character. So these are the things that they need to receive permission to do, if you will.
Steve, I'm going to jump you on something here.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. We were talking about students arriving in school with gigantic imaginations, and by 6th grade, their imaginations had been narrowed. I want to present something to you, and you respond to it.
Okay.
You know as well as I do that one of the purposes of education is to indoctrinate students. And that's a continuing argument in schools. That's why we argue over curriculum. That's why we argue over books. How would that student be indoctrinated? And when we argue over books, when we argue over curriculum, what we want is convention. We want a conventional term for this, a conventional idea about how this works and how that works, so that we all become good citizens. Remember, that's the reason for public school. So what is your response to narrowing students' imaginations in the sake or for the sake of convention?
Well, there are fine lines to everything, right? And I think it's about opening up students' minds, because we want creative thinkers too, right? We want students who can see problems, number one, and solve them creatively somehow, some way, given whatever parameters they have to work with. And so that's part of education too, is to get them to think for themselves, okay? And for the good of the community, for the good of everybody, right? And so, yes, there are certain conventions they need to do. They need to follow certain things, certain rules and certain assignments they have to write, and whether they like it or not, too bad. That's their job. No one's job is perfect. I mean, even my job, I get paid to watch baseball games, but I dealt with athletes, you know, and when you ask a guy a question and he looks at you with disdain and say, I can't talk to you now, I'm icing my shoulder. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, I didn't go to medical school, but I think at 15 million a year, you're qualified to talk with an ice pack sitting on your shoulder. But I mean, we need them to be able to absorb whatever conventions we feel we need them to absorb, but also nurture that inquisitive side, the side that's going to think, for lack of better expression, outside the box, and still be able to understand the conventions, put those conventions into play, you know, as they get older, especially for the, not just for themselves, but the community, and yet have a bigger vision, you know, that it's not just narrow.
Okay. Good response. I like your response, and
thank you.
Good counter argument, sir. Very good counter argument. All right, we have 3 more topics, and we might not be able to touch them all. So pick one of them that we might want to hit before our time runs out.
Well, I think we've kind of hit most of them here. You know, I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. Let's put it that way as well. So there's a time to let the imagination fly, but then there's a time to say, no, this is what you're doing. Okay. So because, you know, the teacher's the boss, you know, and you give the boss what the boss needs or asks for, right? And so, but they also need to see, as I said earlier, there's more. There are other options. And as far, so we want to let them, give them permission to think outside the box. And the other thing is, you know, that partnership between writing and reading. I mean, you become a better writer by reading, you know, by osmosis, the commas and the capital letters all jump into your head, you know, and you can hear the pauses and the, you know, and suggestions I have for students when they do write, for revision purposes, because we have to understand, I don't care how old you are, how long you've been writing, just because you write once does not mean it's done. But the toughest thing about writing anything is writing it the first time. To go back over it, give it a little polish, a little massage is not as difficult as you think. And so, I mean, sometimes if you're in college, for instance, I would tell them, write the paper, okay, and then read it out loud and record yourself and then listen to it. Because when we read something, we're hearing it, okay? And so when you're writing something, you don't realize, I try to get them to put it away and bring it back again and try to read it as if you've never seen it before. Because we all know what it's supposed to say, but sometimes I say, you know, the words don't get down the arm, and you know, you have rotator cuff issues. It doesn't get, you know, the words don't get on the paper. So we leave things out. It happens. But if you read it and then hear it, you know, rehear it, now you're going to say, oh, you know, I repeated this word several times, or I need a transitional sentence, or, you know, and that's when you're going to self-edit better.
In fact,
peer
one
review
of
helps
the
too.
Guidance that I've received was, if you got to write something, start writing. Because once it's down on paper, like you just described, then you can change it. You could identify the other parts of it that need to be developed. So Good point. Well, Steve, we talked about a lot of different topics here. If there would be one takeaway that you want everyone to have from our conversation, what would that takeaway be? The
takeaway for teachers, relax. Okay. We'll get there. Okay. Writing is not about the commas and capital letters and the red marks. It's about getting the ideas out there. Okay. And somehow, some way, the mechanical part will take care of itself. We can't let that be the impediment to getting the ideas out there. And we all know.
What's your call to action? What do you want people to do with this knowledge?
What I want them to do is just relax for their students too, and just take some of the stress away, because all too often the kids feel, oh no, it's writing time, you know, from 9:23 to 10:02, and writing exists all day, you know, and point out in your social studies books, your science books, some well-written phrases or sentences for no other reason, just point out so they know writing doesn't just exist in a vacuum of 9:23 to 10:02.
And if people want to know more, how do they contact you?
Well, my website is on the screen here, www.nudgingtheimagination.com. And my email address is very simple, nudging@aol.com. And I welcome anyone who wants to try some of these methods to contact me.
Great. It's been fun having you as the guest, and I hit you with the hardest questions I can think.
So well, I hope I hit back well enough.
And my name is David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting, and I'd like to give thanks to my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra Williams, who is the brains behind Educational Innovations 360 Degrees. Thank you for being here with us tonight, Steve, and our audience, and I wish you a wonderful evening.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.